A very good point. Again, you can ask yourself if you want to throw out all genetic scientists worldwide and all their findings. So not only is there no literary tradition to connect these people, not only is there no genealogical connection to connect these people, no more is there a linguistic connection, historical connection, any connection. There's no genetic connection with DNA either. So of course they're not the 12 tribes, and they don't go back to Jacob. I mean, that's, again, self-evident and obvious.
Okay, that one was for Al-Azhar. The next one is for Dr. Brown. This is a super chat from Tazara, and he did the format right. Thank you very much. It makes it so much easier to find your questions when you do that. You've made several appeals to DNA. Is there any verified ancient Israelite DNA to compare with modern populations? That's the Dr. Brown.
Yeah, great question. So basically what you have to do is in DNA studies, and I'm not a genetic scientist, so this is what I've learned from those who are, that you're looking for commonalities. You can find now common origin, right? Common denominator. And you keep going back and you can trace it narrower and narrower. Now the more data you have from all around the world, that enables you to trace things even further back in time. And then as you can trace things back to Middle Eastern communities that have been there through the centuries, that helps you. So yeah, this is, again, is not a specific science. The one thing I'd agree with Al-Azhar that was presented from a geneticist that was accurately presented, because other things were misrepresented, is that there's not a Jewish gene. Oh, we have the Jewish gene. But you can look at the collective evidence that points to the people going all the way back in time. For example, the priestly gene or the priestly Y chromosome that's found among Lemba priests, Ashkenazi priests, Sephardi priests. And if Al-Azhar is a priest, it's not guaranteed he'd have it, but at least 50% chance that he'd have that Y chromosome. That is all traced back, and it goes, boom, back into a common Middle Eastern ancestor 3,000 something years ago. So you can figure out who that ancestor was, right? Or where it's pointing. But that's how it's done. You look at people groups that are there, people groups that have been dispersed, because there's a lot of history that tells you where people have come from, and the DNA can then confirm it.
Al-Azhar.
In tonight's Fox 32 special report, DNA kits called into question. They are the kind advertised on TV claiming to trace your ancestry. A woman says she used 2 different popular services to trace her family history and got wildly different results. Fox 32's Tia Ewing reports.
This is my mother, my father.
Jennifer Smith says flipping through family albums helps her reconnect with the past.
And I just want to learn as much as I can about my history.
She recently took that learning one step further and decided to try a DNA testing kit.
Ancestry.com, very popular. You know, they're in all of the commercials. Everybody talks about them.
Smith received the kit, followed the directions, and mailed it back.
Just like the lady on TV says, you have to spit in the tube. It's not ladylike, but that's what you do.
Then she waited the 4 to 6 weeks.
And I was shocked.
Smith's breakdown from Ancestry showed 97% European and 2% Asian.
I'm a black girl. I am not a Jewish white lady. I'm black. My parents were black.
She contacted Ancestry with questions, but says a rep told her the results are accurate.
She told me there was no way they could have made an error.
Smith decided to try again, but this time she submitted a DNA to 23andMe.
And the results were very different, but they were not a surprise to me.
The 23andMe findings showed 70% African for Smith, after Ancestry's findings showed none.
Both kits can't be right. One of them has to be wrong.
These DNA tests for ethnicity entertainment value only.
William Gilliland is a biology professor at DePaul. He says DNA kits can be great for connecting family members and finding relatives, but the science for ethnicity testing isn't as concrete.
There's nothing that confident for ethnicity. There's no diagnostic nucleotide. You can say this person is from Europe, this person's from Africa.
So what happened in Smith's case?
The simplest explanation is that one of these test results is just wrong, and the tubes got mixed up or contaminated or something.
We reached out to both Ancestry DNA and 23andMe. Ancestry tells us it's incredibly unusual to find variations of this magnitude. The company says it's best guess that the tubes were mixed up before they were sent to their labs. 23andMe says because companies use different algorithms to make ancestry assignments, you can find differences when comparing tests from different companies.
It's exciting to make discoveries like this, but if they're not true, it's heartbreaking.
Tia Ewing, Fox 32 News.
So I recently took one of those at-home DNA ancestry tests. All I had to do was fill up a vial with a disgusting amount of spit and mail it off for analysis. We're going to be here for a very long time. I just spit it back up in my nose. A couple weeks later, this is what I got. It's a neat little pie chart with these specific percentages that were color matched to different regions on a world map. The report told me I was mostly Southwest Asian, no surprises there considering both my parents are from Iran. That percentage, 86.7, I understood that to be the portion of my DNA that's West Asian. But it turns out that's not exactly what ancestry tests are telling us at all. This is an ad for one DNA ancestry test, 23andMe. An ethnically ambiguous woman travels the world and a circle animates around her, sort of like the pie chart in my test results, as if to say, this woman's DNA is 29% East Asian. And here's an ad for a different ancestry test.
52% of my DNA comes from Scotland and Ireland.
And somehow this information compels him to wear a kilt? Alright, so what are ancestry tests really telling us? Can you help me understand what my results are telling me? Because I'm getting mixed messages from ads and how other people talk about the results. This is Wendy Roth.
I'm an associate professor of sociology at the University of British Columbia. Okay, first of all, these test results are not about your entire DNA. They're about a tiny, tiny fraction of your DNA.
To understand how genetic ancestry tests work, let's start with the DNA itself. There are about 3 billion base pairs in our genetic code. Those are the A's, C's, T's, and G's that form the instructions that make us, us. Of these 3 billion base pairs, 99.9% are exactly the same in all humans. But for the remaining 0.1%, one person might have an adenine where another person has a guanine. These single letter differences are called single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs. Groups of SNPs can help explain why some people are taller than others, or why some people have green eyes while others have brown eyes. But most SNPs have no known effect at all. What many DNA tests are looking at are a relatively small number of SNPs, specific positions in this 0.1% in our DNA, in order to give you your results. When a testing company receives your sample, they compare your pattern of SNPs to different reference populations in their database. These reference populations contain SNPs known to exist more frequently in different modern populations in the world. Then the testing company will give you a percentage that represents how strongly your pattern of SNPs resembles that group. But this process has a bunch of important limitations, and this is where things get complicated.
Lots of markers are found in multiple populations around the world.
First, even trying to classify humans into groups in the first place is tricky. Human genetic diversity isn't organized neatly into groups like countries or continents. Take a look at the distribution of this SNP that affects how a person absorbs folic acid. It's commonly found in Mexico, but also in Chile or even China just as often.
So let's say that a particular marker is found in the South Asian population 30% of the time. There's still a possibility that when you inherited this marker, you got it not from somebody who was South Asian, but from somebody who was in some completely different group that also happened to have that marker.
Second, testing companies put together their reference populations based on academic research and other people that have taken genetic ancestry tests. And most testing companies aren't clear about how many people are represented in their reference populations. So each company might have different reference databases, which helps explain why you might get different results from different companies. So what does this all mean for my results?
This is a probability with a margin of error. So it's not that you overall are 85% West Asian, but that the particular spots that they happen to look at, 85% of those locations are associated with Western Asia in their reference population.
So what about these other results? Am I really 2% African?
You've got a lot of, sort of small trace percentages here. Percentages that small are really not meaningful. Again, because that could be affected by having one person in the database. And if that one person gets reclassified later on because they get, a larger sample, that percentage will disappear.
Ultimately, DNA ancestry tests are really just giving us a probability, the testing company's best guess, and that uncertainty isn't made very clear in the results. Buried in my results, I found this confidence slider. It turns out my results were presented at about 50% confidence by default. When I increased that to 90%, my results got much more vague. All of a sudden, I was broadly West Asian, and a lot of my genetic markers were unassigned. So DNA ancestry tests don't actually tell us where our ancestors lived. They're really just giving us probabilities of where we're likely to have relatives today. But so what if people misinterpret their results? Well, that has consequences. They can make us believe that our ethnicities have these bright line distinctions between them, like in a pie chart.
When people are presented with test results and these percentage breakdowns, and they're led to think that these tests can tell you your race, or they can tell you who you are, that leads to a way of thinking. It makes us feel that there are very stark and clear biological differences between races.
One study found that DNA ancestry tests reinvigorate age-old beliefs in essential racial differences, that our socially constructed racial categories like white or black are essentially different from each other. Some groups have even turned to genetic ancestry tests to try and prove their racial purity.